Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the science show, Human Anatomy, with Miss Tebow and
Miss Abby Samra.
Miss O'Connor. We're trying to get her to join us at some point. We don't have a prep period at the same time, so it's a little bit tricky. But she's also here in spirit with us. So we are talking today about food and digestion. So this is chapter 2. And it's section 3 and 4 in the book. So sections 1 and 2 deal with nutrients in food and what food is made out of, and eating healthy in section 2. And the second part of this chapter deals with how your digestive system actually works. So here we go.
Your essential questions. So the main things we're going to be looking at are what happens to a piece of food from entering your mouth to excreting the remains, and how does the digestive system work with the other body systems. So our section 3 questions: what are the functions of the digestive system? And what are the roles of the mouth, esophagus, and the stomach in digestion?
Your key terms for this section, and we're doing just the top half of the digestive system first, and we'll move on to the second half later. So digestion, absorption, saliva, mucus, enzyme, epiglottis, that's one of my favorite words to say, it's fun, esophagus, peristalsis, and stomach. So just an overview of the organs.
So you've got the oral cavity there, so that would just be the inside of your mouth, right? You have what we call the pharynx, which is kind of just the back of your throat. It's where your throat connects up to your nose and your mouth, and everything's all together there, right? You have your teeth and your tongue, which are going to help you mash up your food. Right?
Nom, nom, nom.
And down into your esophagus. The esophagus is the tube that leads down into your stomach. You have a separate tube that goes to your lungs, and we'll talk about that when we get to the respiratory system. And then down into the stomach. So after the stomach, the food enters your small intestine, and we've got a bunch of kind of what we call periphery organs here, where the food doesn't really pass through them, but they do help with digestion. So things like the liver. Right, so the liver and the gallbladder and the pancreas are all going to help make enzymes to help break down your food. After the small intestine, you've got the large intestine, which is actually shorter. We just call it large because it's wider, right? And then the rectum is where we store the waste before we get rid of it, and then we get rid of it through the anus.
So you think of these periphery organs, I always think of them as like when you're going through a car wash. Like you go through the car wash, that's the digestive system, but then the cleanser and the stuff gets spit onto the car, and that's kind of what these periphery organs do. So we'll talk about those a little bit more later on. All right, so we're going to tell you a little story that happened in 1822 up in, sort of in like the Great Lakes region. They used to do a lot of trapping, and furriers spent a lot of time there. And there was a furrier by the name, like he trapped animals and sold the pelts. His name was Alexis St. Martin. And there was also a gentleman up there by the name of William Beaumont. He was the doctor. So St. Martin was shot in the stomach. And he didn't die. And when Dr. Beaumont was taking care of him, and the whole, we'll kind of explain this to you in class too, when we can kind of show you what we mean, but the hole didn't heal correctly. So like the walls of the stomach didn't heal to the walls of the stomach, and the outside didn't heal to the outside. The walls of the stomach healed to the outside, so it ended up being like this open window, this open hole into the stomach. And so at this point in time, people didn't really know much about the digestive system and how it worked. And Beaumont thought this would be a good opportunity to study the stuff inside your stomach and how fast it takes for things to digest. So they struck a deal, and St. Martin was not super wealthy, so he, Beaumont said, okay, I'll give you room and board, and you can eat for free and stay here for free, but I'm going to do experiments on you. And what he did was he'd take like a piece of chicken and tie a string on it and stuff it into the hole, and then time it, give it an hour and pull it out and see how much it had digested. Or give it 2 hours and pull it out and see how much it digested in 3 hours. And he did this with all different kinds of things, with like vegetables and with name it, he did it. And he took really, really careful notes. And, he was able to figure out the acidity of the stomach acids, which was kind of interesting. So there was a lot that they found out from his experiments. And there's a lot more to the story, and it's like super, super interesting. So if you're curious, on page 60 in our book, there's some information. Yeah, kind of gross and yet interesting.
Yeah, we learned a lot from it.
We really did. And fistulas are still, people use fistulas to study cow digestion. Sorry, it says reproduction. Yeah, and that's what it looks like.
So digestion, the whole point of this body system. So it's the process of breaking down food into molecules that your body can recycle and use to make you.
So 3 main functions of the digestive system, 3 main things that it does. We'll talk about these in a little more detail. Digestion is breaking down the food. So there's mechanical digestion, your teeth chopping things up, and then the chemicals break things down a little further in your saliva and in your stomach acid. Then the second thing is absorption. The nutrients that your food is made of get absorbed through the wall of your digestive system and ultimately end up in your blood and get carried everywhere in the body where they need to go. And then the last part, of course, is elimination. Anything that's not needed gets rid of. Okay, and elimination, when we talk about it in reference to the digestive system, we're talking about feces. Okay, so urine is not really part of elimination as far as the digestive system goes. That's a separate body system. We'll talk about that later. All right, are you ready? Now it's time for a digestive system fairy tale.
Yay! So once upon a time, there was a wee lad, the knight of pizza, who went on a long and arduous journey through the strange and mysterious land of the digestive system.
Dun, dun, dun.
What did he do there? What fate befell him? Our journey begins in the realm of the mouth.
So, in the mouth, here is where my mechanical digestion begins to happen. So, biting and chewing, you have different kinds of teeth in your mouth. If you feel with your tongue, the teeth in the front, those are called your incisors. It sounds like scissors, and their job is to cut your food. Then you've got, in the back, you've got your molars, and those do some kind of grinding hard food down a little bit smaller. So your food is physically broken down into smaller bits, but not small enough to be the small compounds and molecules that can be absorbed. The saliva in your mouth wets your food and makes it easier for it to be swallowed. And there's also enzymes. If you remember what an enzyme is, think about it. What's an enzyme? Got it? Okay, it makes a chemical reaction happen faster. So there's enzymes in your food that break down carbohydrates and complex carbohydrates and turn them into sugars. And then your tongue, this is just a big old muscle, and it moves the food around and helps you to make that bolus, that ball of mushy food that you can swallow.
Yum. So you also have chemical digestion in the mouth. So chemical digestion is actually changing the molecules of your food. So you're taking big molecules and breaking them down into smaller molecules that are easier to absorb, right? So they're better nutrients, basically. So in your saliva, you've got a bunch of enzymes, right? So remember we said enzymes are just biological catalysts. They're just speeding up those chemical reactions, right? And the enzyme that's in your saliva is called amylase, right? So it's breaking down sugars, or it's breaking down carbohydrates into smaller sugars. If you've ever taken like a cracker, like you could just take like a saltine cracker and let it sit in your mouth. If you let it sit in your mouth long enough, the saliva will actually start breaking it down, and it'll start to kind of taste sweet. It's super, super cool.
That is super cool. So this diagram just shows, again, we've talked about this earlier in the year, but what happens to things that are broken down by enzymes. So if you look at the picture of the enzyme, the active site is where the substrate fits in, and that would be like the complex carbohydrate. Okay, we fit into that enzyme, and it's very specific. The shape is very specific. Then that enzyme will break that down, and then you see A and B would be the sugars that are produced. All right, chemical digestion in the mouth also, so we talked about starches turning to sugars. Those are polysaccharides, if you recall, that get turned into monosaccharides. And those sugars, the monosaccharide, one of the monosaccharides is called glucose. We learned about that. There's a couple other ones too. And if you remember what the elements are that they're made of, what's a sugar made out of? What's a carbohydrate made out of? Remember, carbon, hydrate, hydrogen, and oxygen, like water. So now these chemicals are available for your cells to do cellular respiration. And you remember what organelle that happens in? That was the mighty what? Mitochondria. Good job. And think about what that equation was. So swallowing is the last voluntary thing you do. So you have voluntary muscles in your digestive system, and then there's a lot of involuntary muscles. Swallowing is the last voluntary thing that you do in the digestive system, for the most part. It takes about 10 delicious seconds. And we just talked about how the muscles in the upper part of the digestive system are different, and that's because these muscles are voluntary and everything else is involuntary. Thank goodness we don't have to think about every last thing your digestive system does.
You don't have to think about moving that food all the way through your intestines, because that would be...
I would forget.
That would be a pain.
I have to think about my heart beating, and I have to think about having to do all this stuff. Your body's so wonderful, it just does all these things for you. So if you try to swallow and breathe at the same time, take a second and try to do that. Can you do it, Miss Abu-Samra?
I can't do it.
I can't do it either. So, as Miss Abu-Samra mentioned before, you have two tubes in the back of your throat. You've got your esophagus, which is in the back, and that's where your food goes down. And then the tube in the front is your windpipe or your trachea. And you don't want food going down that, because then you would choke. That little flap of skin that gets kind of pushed down and blocks the top of the trachea, that's called the epiglottis, and that is like a little tiny trap door that keeps the food going down the pipe that it needs to.
All right, so the esophagus. So it's lined with epithelial cells. Epithelial cells, that's one of those weird words that has to do with skin, right? So epithelial cells are going to line everything, right? So definitely the inside of your digestive system is completely going to be lined with epithelial cells, and they're going to just protect your throat and everything as you swallow all kinds of scratchy food, right? They're also going to make mucus because you want everything to just slide down easy. And then we have this thing called peristalsis. So these are muscle contractions. It's this wave-like motion that pushes food down, right? So if you've ever thought about, can you eat in space? Can you eat standing upside down, right? You can. Because gravity has nothing to do with it. It's your body pushing everything down to your stomach.
So this little diagram shows how the food kind of gets pushed. So if you had, let's say you had a little blob of food in a straw, and you wanted to squeeze it with your fingers down to the end of the straw. That's kind of how it works, but it's your muscle contractions that are squeezing it down and through.
And then at the bottom of the esophagus, we've got the stomach. All right, so there is one last circular muscle there. It's called a sphincter, right? So any circular muscle is a sphincter. But that's going to keep your stomach closed off when you're not swallowing, right? And that prevents everything from coming back up. So it's going to relax once that peristalsis, once that swallowing motion gets down to the bottom of the esophagus, but it's going to stop you, hopefully, from throwing everything back up.
That's reverse peristalsis.
Yeah.
So in the stomach, your food, that blob of food, is further broken down with mechanical digestion. The walls of the stomach are really thick and muscular, and they contract and relax and contract and relax and churn that food, mush it all up into this thick kind of a thick smoothie called chyme. But then there's also chemicals that are added. Pepsin is an enzyme that breaks food down into short little chains of amino acids. Do you remember what kind of food is made of amino acids, or what kind of macromolecule is made of amino acids? Do you remember?
Protein!
So the acid in your stomach is hydrochloric acid. It's got a really low pH of 2. And if it weren't for the mucus in your stomach, that acid would eat through your stomach. But you have mucus that coats and protects your stomach, and cells are replaced in your stomach really quickly through mitosis. And this just shows your stomach acid, and this actually shows the sphincter that's open.
All right, so certain things can just be absorbed right from the stomach. So things like water, glucose, salts, they can just be absorbed into your body right from the stomach. Most things are going to be broken down further by the small intestine, and then they can be absorbed there. But if it's small enough, it can just get right through the walls of the stomach there.
Okay, we will continue our epic journey through the land of digestion when we meet next. Okay, that's it for now. We'll talk to you next time for the sequel.
Yep.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.